everybody. I am here today with Wendy Tate. She's professor of supply chain management at Haslam's College of Business at the University of Tennessee. And she's also a long-term friend of mine, so I'm very, very proud that she took the time to talk to us about one of her papers that she thinks is worth replicating. So Wendy, hello and welcome. So what is the paper that you chose that you would like to introduce us today?
So a few years ago, and thank you for the introduction, a few years ago, Lisa Elram and a former PhD student of mine, John Kirchhoff, put together this paper. It's called Corporate Social Responsibility Reports, and it's a thematic analysis related to supply chain management. And this paper is particularly interesting. It's actually very well cited. It's in the Journal of Supply Chain Management. And it's talking about what our company's saying about what's important in terms of CSR. And we come up with a number of themes. I actually think it was 10 themes, but it could have been a different number. So we come up with these themes and go, these things are important. And here's what's important based on the reports. Here's what it means to have green buildings, and there are certain terminologies and words used that indicate this is green building and this is what's important. So it would be great to replicate this because we can see as the field of sustainability changes over time, we could see what companies are indicating is most important to them and how they're presenting that to the public. So it's kind of like the promises that they're making to the public. Now, it would be great to see over time. We could say we might do this every 5 years. We might say, let's look at different companies as companies kind of rise and fall from the Fortune 500 or however we look at that. So we initially took and looked at some of the top companies in sustainability, and what we did is we collected their CSR reports from online, and we took those reports, which were generally in an Adobe format, and then we had to convert them into a text format, and then from that text format we did a heck of a lot of cleaning on the data because it didn't always convert right. Tools now are much better than they used to be back in the old days. So so we went through, we have all these reports that we collected and we cleaned the data. So we had these nice text formatted documents that we could use. We loaded those in a file, and then there was this software, and it was called Crawdad software. And Kevin Dooley from Arizona State was one of the developers of that software. And the software just wasn't about content analysis. It was about our counting of words, to see what's important. It really looked at some of the natural language that was in there and would look at phrases and terminology so we could see the context of the word and that it was being used to indicate what it is, what we were looking at. So this software was amazing, and it did all sorts of cluster analysis, and we could do a confirmatory and exploratory factor analysis using this software. So everything was actually great, and the paper is really interesting. Now, why I'm talking about replication of a paper like this, and this was a significant undertaking of work, just getting the data in a state that it was clean, that you could actually use it with this software. It took some time. Now, here we are today, and I'm saying I'd love to replicate this. Well, the issue is that software no longer exists. And so me and where I am in my career, it's really hard for me sometimes to learn really new tricks and tips. And so I have to rely on those that are coming behind me to maybe learn how to use some of these very interesting tools that can start to to sort of look at the language part of it rather than just literally counting words and deeming words important because they show up so many times. So for example, there's a program called WordStat that I've used, but in order to really use it effectively, you have to sort of develop this. You have to teach it how to do what you want it to do. So then it takes, and it's sort of like artificial learning, and then it does what you want. But again, time consuming on the one that I just talked about. That type of doing that would take, I think, a significant amount of time, particularly if you're not really skilled in that. But there's so many opportunities to replicate something like this, and we need to understand what companies are talking about, what is important, why is even sustainability, who cares about these silly reports, and they're all just greenwashing anyway. But truthfully, these reports give you some window into what companies in general are finding important. And from a supply chain perspective, we better hope that we're seeing some carbon emissions reduction, and we're impacting this terrible climate change. And if you look in the reports today, you'll see those of the net carbon zero targets are now in place at many organizations. Well, when we did this, it wasn't. Scope 3, I don't even think was invented when we actually looked at this report. So the reports and the themes are changing over time, and it would be great if somebody could actually come in and replicate this type of research so that we can see what those changes are and how companies are adapting to all of our issues that are out there. That's my replication.
That does sound very, very interesting. So that paper was published back in 2010. Do you recall the years? So the years of the annual reports, the CSR reports that you looked into back then. Is it 2009 data, or could
it was? Yes, I can't remember exactly, but it would have been as current as we could get them for sure. So we would have used every. We would have definitely used the latest that we could find. And some companies are better. And within this paper, you can see the different reports of the companies that we looked at, and it's a cross industry report, making it also very, I think, even more interesting. I guess you could sort of replicate it and maybe choose one of those industries and see if there's a lot of variability. I don't know. I think there's a lot of options there. So to answer your question, I'd have to go back and read it again, which I haven't done for a long time.
So I was wondering, so I think that's a great idea for a replication. Yeah, and I think those natural language processing models, they are pretty powerful today. So you could probably, once you train the model, you might even be able to look into every single year to see how the topics have developed from a gut sense. Would you say that there is something that is more important maybe today than it was a few years ago, like a hypothesis that you would have?
I would say today, if I were going to go look at these themes again, I would say for sure that number one, the net carbon zero goals have significantly advanced, because in 2010, we were saying, well, these goals are net carbon zero in 2030. And, that was a very long time from then. So, they didn't even start really thinking about how can we reduce this 20 years ago. So I would say that, so scope 3 and carbon zero are probably going to be very hot topics. The other thing I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I would think that supply chain related issues like, transportation emissions and things of that nature are probably holding a higher priority. And I like to think, because this is the area that I like to do research in, I like to think that the socially responsible purchasing is more of a target as well. So, we're getting our functional level involved in these more strategic initiatives. And that's what I'm hoping. So I haven't looked at it, but I'd like somebody to go out and replicate it and tell me what's changing.
Do you think would such a software also be able to understand if there is a certain framework underlying the report? Because we have a few, yeah. So we have the Global Reporting Initiative, we have the what's it called, Sustainable Accounting Standards Boards, materiality, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So are those methods able to see that and to trace if it's
Well, I actually related to those organizations and reporting tools, I would expect to see a big increase in mentions of those within these reports. More and more companies are using, for example, science-based targets. Well, again, in 2010, companies really weren't talking about science-based targets. I don't even know if the CDP supply chain branch was started then. So my guess is the CDP supply chain would show up a lot in these reports. Yeah, and then there's many others, the other organizations, and everyone's trying to understand how we can integrate our suppliers into our sustainability initiatives to help bring down emissions and global warming, all those things. So I would guess, if I were to make a guess, that there'd be significant change in those, because that gives them some, like people start to believe that you're doing good things because you're working with these really spectacular organizations, and even looking at logistics and the transportation, the emissions in logistics. In the United States, there's a governmental organization called Smartway, and it has thousands and thousands of carrier members, right? But they can't get the shipper members because it's time consuming, lots of reporting involved. And the shipper members are like, well, we just want our carriers to be there so we can say we hire these certified carriers, and that's all they need. That's the whole engagement. So I find CDP is kind of the same, where we ask all of our suppliers to report to the CDP, but we actually don't report along with them. So, interesting stuff. So I would think if somebody, has the capability to do this, that there would be a lot of interesting information coming out. We're talking, it's been more than 10 years ago. So.
Well, I totally agree. And I think that would be an awesome paper to replicate. So thank you very much for your time, Wendy, and for sharing this with us. And I hope that one of you is in to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.